Hey, what's up, everyone? My name's Zack Olinger. In this podcast series, I talk about relationships. Now, I know, as a man, you may not want to talk about relationships, or you may even tell me that the relationship that you're in is already pretty good. But I'm going to invite you to consider this. Could you be a little bit more fulfilled in the relationship that you have? I would like to have you consider that there may be other ways to kind of see the conflicts that are truly just unnecessary that we all experience in a different light. And if you're open to receiving or just giving me a little bit of your time, then I look forward to my guests and I inspiring you to become a man that can have more freedom, less conflict, and more pleasure in their relationships. Thanks for joining me.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Another episode of the Real Zack Olinger. Today, I've got a guest on, Melissa, and today she's going to talk to us about her relationship with her husband and whatever else may come up through our conversation. So thanks for joining us. Thanks, Melissa, for being a guest. So I'll let you start running with it.
Awesome. Zack, thanks for having me. I'm just so happy to see you start this new venture and all the amazing guests that you'll have. And so I feel honored to be one of those and one of the first ones.
Thank you.
Yeah. So about a year ago, we were in this program together, and it was a program that I had joined at a really low point in my life. I had just had my third baby and gone through just a lot of identity shifts, and I was feeling a tremendous amount of anxiety. And that was also was contributing towards just a hard time in my marriage. And actually, prior to joining that program, I was researching, making my plan for my exit plan, basically for my marriage, because I was just so unhappy. And so through the program, I realized so many things. I was able to let go of my anxiety, which was amazing. But it was also an opportunity for me to learn about personal responsibility in ways that I had never thought of before. I'm a mom of three, so of course I think I'm responsible because I'm responsible for a lot in day-to-day life, right?
Right.
And I'm responsible in the things that I do outside of that. And so, but what I wasn't taking responsibility was for the way that I was showing up in my marriage, and in terms of, like, I guess, speaking what my needs were was the biggest thing. But expecting my husband to know my needs and, fulfill my needs, fulfill needs that maybe he couldn't even fulfill. Maybe those were things that I needed to fulfill for myself. And so it was a completely eye-opening experience when I started taking responsibility for my part in our interactions, and really just taking ownership of, like, showing up as the person that I needed to be, the person that I really was, that I hadn't been in the past. And so I guess I'll just say what I mean by that is I'm a real, this is not, everyone thinks of me as being so friendly, so sweet. That's just like, and that's really who I am. But it's funny, at home with my husband, I was not so sweet. I wasn't so nice. I was, like, always combative. I would have a conversation with him and he would reply back, and I would immediately get defensive. I would immediately get reactive. And it would happen so quickly that I didn't realize that I was reacting until it was over. And then I'd be in a tremendous amount of shame and guilt over it. And yet, like, I could not get out of the cycle. So yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know if you can relate to any of those feelings or
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing and being vulnerable for that. And I think that there's probably a lot of people that'll listen that can relate to that. And it does definitely bring up some things in me as far as like it just inspires questions, and so I think there's I, I guess one thing I want to start off with, and I'll totally get to the points, is that like just for people to know, like some of the people that I've interviewed, like Mac and Lynn and Jason and Melissa, we were all in TCP, Jim Fortin's program. So if you hear about a program or TCP or Jim, that's what we're talking about, just to give you our other listeners context. But to speak specifically to what you were talking about, Melissa, the personal responsibility piece I find interesting, because that's a common theme I've been finding just over like talking to people, is that like that's a big piece. It's like kind of where it starts, is realizing what we're responsible for and just kind of taking a look at ourselves. But to go deeper into like what you're talking about specifically with the interactions, like with your husband and how people see you, like you're friendly and sweet, it's definitely what I think. But of course, we're not together, so I don't know what you're like in an intimate relationship. So, and we all have that, right? We've all got our kind of public and private side. And especially when it comes to intimate relationships, I can look back on, how I showed up with Angela, I'll just say her name, Angela, my ex-wife. And yeah, there was pieces of me that other people didn't see, or if they did, it was super rare, because they didn't have that proximity. And I think there's a lot of people in relationships that can relate to the piece where during conversations, like it could just trigger defensiveness and just being reactive and combative in that piece. And yeah, because I can think back to my own relationships and how that has come up. And so one of the questions I have about that is, like, as you became aware of that, like within you, because like you said, you didn't know that it was happening in the moment. And I've definitely been there where it's like, that just all of a sudden happened, and like you have time to like reflect, and you're like, oh shit, like that, kind of how did that unfold? Like there's a lot of, that's happened for me even recently, like where there's been times where I'm like, oh, like when you're in the moment, and sometimes I call it in the shit, when you're in the shit, like you don't, it can be difficult to have an objective awareness of what's going on. So what I'm curious about is, it sounds like, anyway, since you said where you were at last year, you were working on an exit strategy, you were thinking about divorce and all of this kind of thing. You guys are in a much better place now than you were. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
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 So I'm
I
curious
didn't say
about how
that,
that.
did I?
No, but it was basically implied, you know what I mean? Like I could just kind of tell from like the language of body language that you weren't like, and I'm still looking like, or you would have executed, I would have assumed, like if you were looking and it wasn't good, probably a choice would have been made within a year. I don't know. But I am curious about how, like, what helped you like reduce that kind of conflict, or how did you start to like shape that or change that, being reactive and combative, like, with your husband? What did that look like for you? And what did that look like within your relationship? Was it just you? And did it take some change on his part as well? I've kind of put a lot in there, so just pick any pieces you want with that. So, yeah.
Yeah. In the beginning, I was just laser focused on my own way that I was showing up, as I mentioned, like who I was being. I hadn't had deeper awareness in the past of if my my immediate actions. So I just started paying attention to how I was being. It was really just all on me. I just decided to take complete 100% responsibility for the way I was being, and not worrying about him at all anymore. Basically, what he was doing. Where in the past, I think so hung up on, he did this and he's doing that, and making it all mean something negative about me. And when I let that go, go, it was like magic. It really was. It was like all of a sudden he started speaking more nicely to me. He started doing things without me having to ask him, or doing things for me, or for the family that in the past I would have to, I hate the word nag, but he would say I would nag him so much in the past. And so I stopped doing it. I completely stopped doing it. And then I just saw huge shifts on his side. I stopped controlling. I guess I was trying to control everything is what it comes down to. And I didn't realize at the time either. And then I had this awareness that I was trying to control everything all the time, and not just with him, but in pretty much every aspect of my life.
Gotcha. So it was definitely when you started to look at yourself, and like you said, it was cutting out just a little bit there, but I just want to make sure that we got it. When you decided to let go of like expectations, would you say, of like how or like the like how you were interpreting like him? I'm just trying to remember like how you may have put it, as far as when you were starting to pay attention to like how you were being. And then I think there was a piece about like letting go of, I don't know if it was expectations or just kind of like the way you wanted him to be, or how you were interpreting his responses to you.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what I said, but I think, just letting go of, what his responses, my interpretations of his responses. I don't know if I've said it like that, but that's definitely part of it, because we are personality wise, we're on opposite sides of the scale. And I think DISC a little bit. So I'm a high, and he is a high C. And so he's basically, I'm big picture and he's all about the details. And sometimes, it was like so frustrating for me, because asking me all these details. And that's when I would get to realized, I just leaned deeper into that understanding of like, this is just how he processes information. It's not personal. It's not personal.
Gotcha. And just out of curiosity too, so like how long have the two of you been married?
14 years.
14 years. Okay, so that's a long stretch for sure. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of time for things to, I mean, if there was anything about, past history of like behaviors and interpretations or like resentment and things like that, there's definitely been time for like what we could say cruft or walls to have been built.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm curious, was
And
there a lot of that? Or go for it.
yeah, well, and we've been together for 21 years, so we dated for quite some
Gotcha.
time beforehand. But you're exactly right. So many walls. I remember feeling like we would go, and we really had been like ships passing in the night during the week, with the family stuff and work and everything. And so, we had this one day dedicated every week, but I could feel it. Like I could feel like it took almost half of the date night for my walls to start coming down to be able to like really open up and connect with him. And that was one day a week for an hour, so it was most of the time my walls were up, other than that short period of that short glimmer. And then, COVID happened. We stopped going on date nights.
Right. Yeah. So the program pretty much started like right as COVID was ramping up. And so I guess that was pretty serendipitous timing in a way, for that to start.
It was.
Yeah.
It was huge. I don't think we would have survived a lockdown.
Right. That's kind of what I was going to go with next, is just out of curiosity too about like since you were in the place of like, like you said, planning your exit strategy and things like that, what kind of lead up time was going on for that? Like how long had you been feeling or entertaining that thought? I'm just curious if you don't mind sharing that. Like how long, like had you felt that way and
Yeah,
started
it had
seriously?
been, yeah, it was probably about 3 months prior um, to March, so maybe December of the year prior.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was definitely, I was really digging my heels in to the fact that it wasn't working. I'll just
Mm-hmm.
say that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And um was he like, I'm getting kind of personal, you can totally not answer this, I'm just kind of curious, is he aware of like where you were at? Like does he know like that was something you were considering?
I don't think so. I
Gotcha.
don't think he knew how bad it was, even though we had many discussions. I don't think he really got it. I really don't think he.
Gotcha. So in that regard, like it wasn't like it wasn't something that maybe if he had kind of maybe thought into a little bit more, like he could see like that would be something that you would be considering. Like it was obvious, there's obviously been some conversations that would lead one to maybe think like it's a possibility, right? Is that accurate? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. And so I'm pretty fascinated that so much of the change that has happened for you guys has been just simply due to your own change. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I
I
think
would have
that's really
never.
interesting.
Yeah, I would never wanted to believe it. And in fact, like I've been in counseling for years, and you know, my counselor had sort of alluded to that, but I had never gotten it. I just never got it.
Right. Gotcha. So your counselor was alluding
And
to that,
then
like changing yourself. Is that what you're saying? I see.
yes,
Okay. I see. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Sorry, I didn't
yes, but
interrupt.
I was
Yeah.
like, well, that's okay. But I was dug in. Why should I have to change? I'm doing all this work. I'm trying to make it work
Mhm,
because I really felt like I was doing everything to make it work.
mhm.
And I really felt like I was the only one putting the effort in.
Gotcha. Right. No, I could definitely see that. I can see where a lot of people, especially I think on the female side of things, on the woman's side of things, where um they're doing a lot of the work, 2 or 4 in the relationship. And then there's a lot of things that don't seem to be appreciated or reciprocated or any of that. And I think resentment is probably a huge piece for a lot of people. Yeah, that seems like that word totally resonates with you.
Oh my gosh. I didn't realize I was so angry. I was so angry. And it wasn't necessarily, it was directed at him, but it wasn't about him. It was about me, like shoving down everything for so long, shoving down my wants and my needs. And um, he couldn't know. He couldn't know a lot of it, or he couldn't hear what my wants or needs were just because of my delivery.
Mm, that's an interesting piece too. So that brings up a couple of things. So actually a few things. One is like it's not necessarily what you have to say, but how you say it that can be hugely impactful about getting the outcomes or the results that you're looking for, right? So yeah, the delivery piece I think is key. I've said that since college. I remember being in a relationship with one of my girlfriends in college, and I'm like, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Like, it's like I totally remember saying that to her. That was a thing for us, and so I can resonate with that for sure. And then another thing um, that it makes me curious about is that so when you became aware that you had a responsibility to communicate your needs, and that you couldn't just assume that your husband was going to just know um, like what your needs were, when you were able to communicate those, and I guess the two things around that piece is like, how did you change your communication with that? And then how did he like respond to that, as far as like how did he show up, like because it's going to take like two people, right? Like if you had,
Yeah.
we'll just kind of put it
Right.
this way, if you had
Yeah.
regained this awareness and you had chosen to communicate your needs and you changed how you were communicating your needs, if it's still, if you had done all of that and it still wasn't reciprocated, then there would still be a challenge, right? There would still be some conflict, I assume. Would that be accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I'll just say something we continue to work on all the time. I mean, it's tremendously improved, but it's getting better every day as we're both kind of learning how to communicate with each other after 21 years, right? It's funny.
Yeah.
It's funny how that works. But I don't think I was very much in touch with my own feelings, and then I felt very vulnerable sharing my feelings. And I think once I got comfortable enough, I guess, and felt safe enough to be able to share those, it opened the door for him to maybe share more about how he was feeling, which is really never, I won't say never. Maybe we did that a long time ago. Maybe we just lost it somewhere along the way.
Mhm.
I'd have to say that's probably what happened. So it's been sort of like relearning for
Mhm.
both of us. And
Gotcha.
feeling and having trust with each other too.
Yeah. Yeah, I can appreciate the trust aspect. And one thing that you mentioned that I find interesting as well, that I'm curious about, is the safety piece, because I know that's definitely, I think that's true on both sides. And I think it's because, we both, the way that I view things, right, is we both have the masculine and feminine energy in us, and the feminine definitely desires a certain feeling of safety before an expression happens. And if they don't feel safe in the relationship or the environment, they're not really going to express themselves, or if they do, it's not going to be in a healthy, open way. So I'm curious then, when you started to make these changes, how did your husband, like, since I'm not sure of like what if any work he did on himself, but like how did he provide that safety for you? Like what did that safety look like in your relationship that allowed you to be vulnerable and to share those feelings that you were starting to get in touch with and to express your needs?
I think that I had to, honestly, I think I had to provide that safety for myself first,
Mm.
um, and take a risk and put myself out there, again and again and again. um, and so I, I think it's hard. It's really hard to, but I guess I started getting some validation back. Um, the more I did it, the more I got some of that back. And that was something that we had struggled, or I felt like I wasn't getting validation in the past. And most of us need validation, but I really need validation. And so, yeah, I guess it was just the validation that
Yeah,
I was getting that encouraged me to continue on.
gotcha. So I think that's an important piece to kind of highlight as well. So a couple things about that too. So one, you had to provide the safety and decide that you were going to take a risk and be vulnerable. That was kind of the first thing. And then the other piece of that was that
Yeah.
in the beginning, it wasn't necessarily received by your husband. Like you didn't get results like immediately. Like you said, you had to do it again and
Yeah.
again and again. But eventually, like he reciprocated. He saw you. Like, so I think that's the other piece to call out, is that it's not I don't think so much external validation, but it's just kind of like, as
Yeah.
we learn, is that like what everybody wants in relationships is to be seen and to be heard. And so eventually your husband started to see you and hear you and provide. And once that space was provided, then that provided that openness that really probably blossomed things for the two of you. Would that be right? Like that probably,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's important too about, for men is that to just understand that, seeing and hearing our partners is a huge thing. And that really just plays into being present, like it's not just like sharing space and like watching the TV and like having your partner talk to you. It's like you give them like your attention. It's a focus, like like men know what it's like to be focused. And so being present with your partner is like giving them that that love. Like if you're focused on a project and you're creating something as a man, like you're putting some love into that, and it's your partner's no different, to be present and to listen and to feel and to like just really be with them in that moment. And that allows the feminine to really be seen and heard, which is going to just open up a lot of things. And so I find that, a really interesting unfolding for you guys. Like there was a lot that you had to do. Like one, you had to take your own personal responsibility. You had to do your own change. You had to start dropping like your interpretations of how he was responding to you. And you basically just had to decide to start over, like in a way, like on how you were going to
Right.
approach him. And then not only that, you had to choose to be vulnerable, and not just once, like you had to keep doing it. Like you had to decide to be committed to getting that kind of an
Mm,
outcome. Right.
yeah, it's
Um,
true.
and thankfully your husband like caught on or became conscious enough to respond in a way that facilitated a form of healing for you guys. Because on the flip side, I could see a partner or a feminine personality in a relationship doing all of that work. That's a lot of work you did, for sure. It was a shitload of work you did. And then having their masculine partner still not show up, you know what I mean? Like still not get to that point of being present,
Mhm.
or get to
Yeah.
the point of not seeing their partner or hearing their partner. I think that's something that needs to be called out to be like really key. You did a lot of key things on your own, which was a massive amount of work and being vulnerable. But on the flip side, I should say, and on the flip side, your partner had to show up, because it's a relationship. There's two sides. Like you can't do
Oh,
it
yeah.
all. You can't do it all. So thankfully your husband responded in a way that really allowed things to blossom for you. Because had he not, would you say that you would have probably proceeded with a divorce after putting in all that effort and that change? Like, or I mean, where do you think you would be now had he not shown up that way for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, so my commitment, is very deep, and it's, I had a very strong belief, um, in like that commitment to my marriage, right? So it felt really scary that I was like on that edge at the time. But yeah, there comes a certain point where if you take that final step, and I'd shared this with my counselor, it's like, until I try everything that I can possibly do within my control, then, I'm not going to give up. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, what more can I do beyond all those things? The way you just put the work that I did together was like, that was so beautiful. And in a way, I haven't been able to articulate it. So thank you for that. That was amazing. Um, yeah, because I think you have to get to a certain point where and only right, where
Mhm.
that point is. Um, yeah, but I'd have to say that probably very likely if I would have done all of that, because it was a ton of work.
Mhm.
And how long are you going to work until you realize like the other person is not going to put in their 100%?
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things I like about um, that quote. And again, I believe Einstein said it, right? The very definition of insanity is repeating the same behavior over and over again, expecting
Yeah.
a different result. So yeah, had you done all of that work you did and you kept choosing to be vulnerable and not at some point receiving what you needed from your partner, then yeah, like when do you call it? When do you call it? And there's no quantifiable like position, like as you said, like only you will know. But yeah, I think that's those are really key pieces, and I find it's pretty heartwarming in a way to see it work. You know what I mean? Like it's really cool to see how you arrived to this awareness. You did all of this work, you put in this effort, and you chose the vulnerability, and we were persistent and committed to it, and it worked, because it could go either way. And so I just think it's because, like I mentioned before, because if your husband hadn't shown up, it's not that your efforts would have been all for naught, because that's great work on yourself that you could take in
Yeah.
going forward. So it's not like it was pointless or anything like that, or fruitless.
No.
It's just yeah, it's just really cool to see that. I'm not sure what it looks like for your husband's side. I don't know what may have inspired him to show up that way. But I think in the beginning, a lot of us, in the beginning of relationships, we're probably definitely more present with our partners. We're learning, and like, it's just kind of like it's all new. So like we're still figuring things out. So by its very nature, we have to be, I think, a little bit more present. And then as we get used to our partners, like we just start to take things for granted, and things become routine, and like we start to have you know like we just kind of lose touch with that. And so yeah, I don't want to speculate, but it's just curious to wonder, like, if your change on thought due to all that work that you did, if that didn't just kind of like trigger or inspire this connection within him of like, hey, like this is new, so I've got to be present. Like I've got to kind of learn about this. And maybe
Yeah.
and maybe that's why it took him a minute, because he had
I
this
think he
routine.
definitely saw.
Yeah. It's like he had a routine with you, and so he was not really it wasn't striking him that this is a new Melissa, like she's approaching me differently, so I'm just responding out of habit, until it sunk in. And I guess that's a question that comes up for me too. How long do you say, like, how long would you say that it took for that for that change to happen within your husband, when he first like kind of saw you and heard you, after you being vulnerable time and time again?
I mean, it was definitely already shifting. Started TV in March of 2020, and I would say like we were already seeing big shifts. So really, it was fast. If I think
It was
about it, it didn't
fast.
feel like that in the beginning, but in a period of 3 months, I would say it
Okay.
was it had shifted so much. Um,
Gotcha.
Now, like I still have to. Um, I think this is just where the responsibility comes into, because I do still feel like I have to be like very intentional about continuing to show up in the same way.
Hmm.
It's up to me. If it's if it's meant to be, it's up to me.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think there's only been maybe one time since over the past year, or a little bit over a year, where I've had that feeling like, oh my gosh, is it going to work? But I used to feel like that. Like, is it going to work every single day? So,
Gotcha.
you
Yeah.
know, we're all going to go through our patches. Those are just inevitable, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. No, that's excellent. So how have the conversations been like with you and your husband now? Like, has he acknowledged this? Like, have you guys spoken about this? Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, I there were so many things I just wasn't sharing with him. So I just started sharing with him the work that I was doing, like, kind of after the fact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was, it wasn't in the moment, but it was probably several months later where I'm like, hey, look, that's always been my personality. I've always been into, personal growth and development. Um, that's always been my thing, but he's never really known. I've never really shared exactly what I was doing. Um, and so it's opened up so many conversations with us about like deeper conversations that we never had around some of these topics.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so funny is that, I gained such an appreciation for him, like the person he is. It was almost like I don't say we were dating again, but it was almost like going back to the beginning of the relationship, really like remembering why I was attracted to him in the first place, and why, um, why at our foundations we are very, very similar. It's just there's a lot of noise around how we approach life that is different. So getting back to those foundations is such a gift. It's such a gift.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. It's like I'm very, very happy and excited, like, for you guys, because that's I don't know. There's a lot that um, I think there's so much that other people could relate to, and just to see kind of like a success story, like is great, for sure. It's like it's very uplifting, I feel, um, and just to know too, like what it takes on both sides, right? That it's like, and it's not necessarily, well, I don't want to necessarily it's it's just it's about making a choice to kind of like do it, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just kind of like go for it, and just know that it's within the place it starts is within all of us. Like it's always, we can't change our partners, like, so we've got to start with ourselves to make a shift. um, and then as we do that, it may or may not be reciprocated, but that's at least a starting point for sure. And so it's always cool to see when that has like a positive outcome, because I think there's quite a few of us that go through like a self-development journey, or like growing ourselves and changing ourselves, where our partners um, just don't really reciprocate that, or don't receive that. And so it's cool when, to hear when the opposite is true. And so he's never done any kind of program or anything with you, but he's
No.
always known that you have, like, yeah, right. So that's always been a part, like when you guys first got together, like it wasn't something kind of new that was introduced. It was just part of like, hey, that's who you were from the onset. Is that accurate?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. Um, but it's funny. One of the things I began to appreciate from him is just he's kind of always been an old soul, and there's so many things that I was learning through TCP
Mm-hmm.
that when I really took a step back and looked at him, I'm like, he was living a lot of this. Just and it's just inherent in him, and I haven't been able to see this in the
Gotcha.
past. So it was like, oh, that's pretty sobering, right? It's pretty eye-opening to be like, he had I been receptive, maybe I could have gotten this from him earlier. But I firmly believe everything, happens in the time it's supposed to happen.
Mhm.
But yeah.
That's interesting. So in that regard, it makes me curious, like, since that's how you were from the onset, and you've always been that way. So the Melissa that he knows and that he fell in love with from the beginning was always on that path, right? And so there's this other saying, which I also think is from Albert Einstein, where it's,
Yeah.
I'm going to paraphrase it. It's like, you know, men marry women in the hopes that they won't change, but they do. And women marry men in the hopes that they will change, but they don't. And it's kind of, it's obviously a generalization.
Yes. Yes.
It's obviously a generalization. But the point that I'm curious about with that is, had you not been involved in like self-transformation when he first got, met you and fell in love with you, and then you took it on, and it was just part of this change that you went through, like how receptive would he been at that point?
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely that side of it too, where you see it definitely personified in culture. I've noted, yeah, I've taken to starting to watch shows and like take notes on the shows on when certain things like appear, because I just want to be able to reference it. And I know for a fact that I've seen a number of times where the male character, who's usually the husband, he's in a relationship with the woman, and he's like, what happened to, and he'll reference how his partner was like at the beginning of the relationship, and the woman responds like, with some type of explanation of like, I'm not that person anymore,
Mm.
and it's just, to me, it just notes like how at least it's modeled to us. And I think there's definitely this kind of expectation from men, or like desire instilled, indoctrination, that their female partners don't change. Like, I fell in love with you when you were at this state, and that's what I love, but by the woman's nature, just simply by her nature, is to change, and so I think that's where this kind of schism plays in. So I think it's interesting. It's an interesting piece that you were always into personal development, so that never changed, so would it have
Well,
been different had you not been in that? I don't know. That's complete
yeah.
speculation, like so.
Well, years ago, when I first started, so I'd read a lot of books, and then I started seeing a counselor years ago, and I learned about boundaries.
Mhm.
I didn't know what a boundary was. So that was actually a really rough patch for us, because
Uh,
I was learning, and usually when people, I think this is pretty common when people are learning boundaries, it's like I took it to the extreme, like line in the sand.
mhm.
This is what I am available for and unavailable for going forward. And it was like one day it was like a 180,
Right.
So we were both learning through that process. But I think, yeah, that was a hard time for him to see me change, and we had to reestablish ourselves at that point, from that. So he hasn't always been like so easily accepting of change, I'll say.
Right. No, I think thanks for sharing that, because that's a great example of the principle, right? Of like you performed this change that seemed, like you said, it was like 180. One day it was just kind of like this. The day before it wasn't, and the next day it
Mhm.
is. And here's the new Melissa, like, you know what I mean? And he's like,
Yeah.
well, what's going on? Like, so yeah, I think it's really cool to see somebody from the male side that can work with that and not take it as like a personal assault, or view it as like crazy. That's another term I really don't like, when
Mhm.
when the woman changes, or how they express
Oh yeah.
themselves. We totally label that. It's everywhere. I just want to destroy that, because it's not crazy. It's just it's just the nature of the feminine to change and
What about
express.
hysterical? What
Yeah,
about
no, man.
hysterical?
Yeah, all of it. Anything that has that connotation of like being derogatory towards that piece of the feminine is like, or any piece really, but it's really, that piece is called out a lot, like where it's like, don't freaking express yourself. Don't change. Like, she's crazy. You know what I mean? Or like,
Yes.
yeah. And it's just, or hysterical, right? Like if you get wildly emotional, like, oh, she's just being hysterical. She just being hysterical. Like, yeah, it's just so mitigating and like marginalizing to the feminine. Is obviously antagonizing, and it serves no good. It's no serves no higher purpose for anybody. Yeah, that's just something that like I want to call out for sure, because I think it's something that as we change that, because I think it'll change as we change that, like our relationships will just get so much healthier, all the way around, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, to get back to the point with your husband, to just see and experience that change within you, and then to have it within himself to work with that, and like not hold that change against you. Like I don't know, maybe I'm assuming that maybe
Right.
he
No, he
did,
doesn't.
like, yeah. So
Well, he doesn't now. Maybe he did.
right.
Nobody, nobody does it.
So I think that's pretty cool, because I think I don't know how many women would actually, you know, do that without feeling like some sort of, and maybe he did feel some resentment, but to see it, it sounds like where you guys are at now, he's able to kind of see it for what it is, you know, from what I'm picking up from you, he seems to at least be able to work with that, you know, and not, yeah, like, I don't know, like we spoke about it earlier, the amount of resentment, how would you like say the resentment is in your relationship now? Like, does it even exist, or is it, is it greatly reduced, or like, how does that look like for you now?
Well, I think for me, I can only speak for me.
Hmm.
I was actually, I catch myself now, um, in things that I used to do all the time. Like I was, um, I don't know, something as mundane as like, he didn't take out the trash, or he left this out. And those things just to just really just set me off. And I would just get so seething mad. And, but now, like, I catch that old feeling come up and I'm like, this is not going to serve me. Like, I can point it out to him later.
Hmm.
Hey, a reminder, um, when I'm in the proper state of mind. But yeah, it's like, it's amazing. It's such a choice to go into this state. And then I realized the only one suffering from me getting angry over the trash not going out or whatever it is me.
Mm, mm, right. Yeah. And so I guess you could say that would stem from like, um, yeah, I guess I'm curious too, like expectations in a way. And then like, um, so you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the conversation, something that I wanted to ask about that I didn't get to was about, like needs, right? Needs being fulfilled, and needs that he might not be able to fulfill, and needs that you might
Yeah.
be able to fulfill on your own. Like, so I wanted to, I wanted to speak into that, because I think that's important, as well. Because I think there's people that can really connect with that, where they look at their partner and they're like, they're not going to show up that way. Like, I can just tell you right now, I've been with this person, like I just am not seeing it, you know, like,
Mm.
even in the beginning of the relationship, so to speak. So what, if you don't mind, if you don't care to share some of those needs, and then what that looks like, how you go about fulfilling that, like what does that look like in your relationship? Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So, um, yeah, I, he was, I just felt like he wasn't really interested in talking to me about me and like
Mm,
what was going on with me aside from my roles as a mother and a worker. Um, Now I see he was trying to connect with me, when he would ask me about work. But I didn't want to talk to him about work.
mm-hmm,
And then, so I would shut down, and then he would pull away
mm,
because I was shutting down. Um, where I could have just said, like, hey, I'm so glad you're interested in hearing about what's going on with me at work, but I'd really love to share with you about, this other thing, like, and that has to do with only me, right? And what
mm-hmm,
I'm going through and what I'm working on. Um, and I think too, like, I thought he just didn't care, which wasn't the case. It was just a matter of, I guess it was just a matter of communication, really. Um, but yeah, so I didn't feel like he saw me, like you said earlier, because he wasn't asking about me. He was always asking about everything that had to do with my roles in life.
right. Gotcha. So that's a thing that comes up when you mentioned that is when you started to reframe it that way and be like, hey, I'm really glad you're interested in that, and I'd like to talk to you about something else like this.
Yeah.
How did he respond to that? Did he start to be more present with you in those cases and still be interested, even though you shifted the focus away from what he had originally asked about? Like, I don't want to talk about you. I want to talk to you about work. I want to talk to you about this. Like, did he still remain present with you, like in those?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if he did in the beginning or if it took some time. It may have, but I think, once I stopped reacting, I would get angry, that he was
Sure.
asking me about work again. I want to
Hmm.
talk about, I want to talk to you about work. I'm at work, most of my waking hours. And, there's more to me than just that. It's kind of how
Right.
I was feeling.
Hmm.
But instead of saying that or something around that, I would just get mad and then I think once I stopped getting mad about that and just saying, hey, look, I want to talk about this, like it took some time because he really wanted to connect with me on my work stuff. And
Hmm.
um, I just didn't see any value in that. I just, you know,
Yeah, that's super interesting, this piece. So what came up for me about this is that it seems like, and I think a lot of men can relate to this, where like the easiest way for them to maybe connect with their partner is through what they do, right? Since that's a masculine trait. Like, what do you do? Like, how is your
yeah,
how is work because of like what did you do? What happened in that doing piece of you, right? Whereas like you are like, look, that is like, I don't even care about that. Like, I want to talk to you about like how I'm being, like who am I, like how I'm
exactly.
being. And for the masculine side, they're like, oh, that's feeling, and that's nebulous, and that's like dynamic, and like I don't know how to like wrap my, that's not a doing thing, you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
because most men are disconnected with their own way of being and their own feeling, that like they don't know how to appreciate connecting with people, even themselves, but even their partner, in that realm. Like, oh, that's, yeah, let's talk about that. Like that's the piece of you that like shows up in all of the doing. Like there's something behind the thing that does everything, and you want to connect on that level. That's what you're asking to have be seen and heard. And I think a lot of men, they get so focused and they're so used to being in their element that way, that they are just like, the only thing they identify with is execution and doing and outcomes. They don't even necessarily are aware that there's something behind that, like that's before that. Like, what is the
Yeah.
being doing the doing, like, yeah. And
Hmm.
so for them to be asked to connect with that, I think is pretty kind of foreign. And like they might be like, I don't even know what to do with that. Like, so
Yeah.
um and so I just, yeah, that's an interesting thing to be brought up, because I think a lot of people can relate to that. It makes a lot of sense to me that you would want, that to be your connection point, because you're already going to have people at work that connect with you on the doing. You're like, look, I already got that,
Right.
and the people at your work aren't necessarily concerned with how are you doing, like how's your being doing. So when you go home to your refuge, to your safety again, you're like, that's a big
Hmm.
thing for the feminine. You just want to be able to relax into that. You just want to be able to surrender now
Yes.
and just kind of like let go of that masculine doing and have a place to unfold, to be seen and to be heard, cradled, and just kind of be like, and that's where you want the connection to be. You don't want somebody to ask you like, hey, how did work go? Because you're like, like, I don't give a shit about that. Like, like, because there's another piece of me, which is the
Right.
being that needs to be, loved and nourished. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's such a big piece that, and I'm not attacking guys, it's just, I just think it's fascinating how we've been modeled, and educated and indoctrinated as men, that we just aren't in tune with that, most of us. And I find it fascinating that like some of the younger generation is starting to come into that a little bit more, but there's definitely a large piece of us, that are older, like that, and even some of the younger guys aren't aware for sure. Cause I worked with a 21-year-old male who wasn't aware of some of this stuff. So I know that I'm not trying to be generalizing here, but just as our culture indoctrinates us and as we were modeled by our parents and our friends, as guys, by no fault of our own, we just weren't made aware that this is a very, very important piece, of a
Right.
relationship. So I think it's interesting when you speak about it that like you still are doing a lot of work because you have to, which is great. I'm not saying it's wrong at all. I'm not judging it. I'm acknowledging it because you're taking the time to basically educate your partner,
Yeah.
and he's being
Yeah.
receptive to it. That's the big piece, is that you have to be open as a
That's a big
man.
piece.
You have to be open to it, because if you're not, like, it's just not it won't go anywhere. It's still, I mean, it obviously takes two. So I think it's really cool that you have the patience, like, as you said, because you still get pissed off about it sometimes. You're like, look, like, but you have that persistence, and that he is showing up to be willing to to receive that from you, to receive that instruction, to receive that awareness from you. Because I think that's another piece too, is a lot of guys are closed off to allowing their partners, especially their feminine partners, to educate them as on things like this, like, there's just so many layers to it, I think, for guys that block them off. And so it's really cool to hear of an experience where, yeah, it takes time, it's not like overnight, but at the same time, like, there's this, it's reciprocated. There is, at some point, it's reciprocated. He's open, his openness to it
Right.
is I would like to think inspiring. I find it a great, you know, a great thing to hear, just because it's a little atypical from, like, I think what most people experience in their relationship. So it's nice to see. It's just nice to see. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I have to give him a lot of credit. Yes, I'm still doing a lot of the work, but I have to give him a lot of credit. He's very open and receptive, and we're growing together in so
Right.
many ways. So
Yeah. That's awesome, Melissa. Well, I guess I'll just kind of wrap it up for the sake of time, but I just really want to say thank you for sharing all of that, and being a guest like this. I love these kind of conversations because I never know where it's going to go. I never know what people's stories are and what their experiences are. And this one was, yeah, I think a lot of people will resonate with it. I just love how it's unfolding for the both of you, and definitely want to applaud you for all of the effort that you've put in and that you continue to put in. And your husband's side too. And I just know that, like, there's a lot that you've had to do. So I just definitely want to acknowledge that, and you continue to do. So just shows a real commitment and effort on your part to really make a change and to go with it, yeah, and to get the outcomes that you're wanting, and to do what you need to do to get there. And so it's just it's inspiring. It's cool. I really think it's awesome. So thank you.
oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to reflect on this. It's been a journey. But to hear you speak back to me as you did, like I said, you articulated so well what that process and journey has been for me. So it's amazing to get to chat today, and hopefully, yeah, the conversation is helpful for others who are in relationships who are maybe struggling or can relate to just the journey.
No, for sure. I think there's definitely a large section of people out there that are in relationships that have, if they're not there, they feel like they're heading there, or they're there now and dealing with some things that are extremely similar. So yeah, I would like to think that they would be able to get some takeaways from that, and or at least if they've gone through it, they can reflect on it. There's just so much here that I think a lot of people can connect with. So yeah, I really, really appreciate you sharing, because I think it's very helpful. Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zach.
Sure. Well, thanks, Melissa. I guess I'm really bad about this in a sense, so I'll just do this now. Is there any social media or anything that you want to like promote, or like I don't even like to use the word promote. I'll have to like edit this out. Is there any way that people can connect with you, or like find you online or anything if they wanted to, work with you or anything like that? I want to be able to make sure that you
Yeah.
have. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I do help. I have a coaching business, and so I do help busy, overworked moms who are overwhelmed to achieve peace and calm. And I'd love for them to connect with me through my website, and it's melissasalmeron.com, MELISSASALMERON.com.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks, Melissa. Appreciate it. And yeah, it was fascinating talking with you. I appreciate your time so much.
Your knockout punch for today is that repetition is the mother of all skill. And that goes for communication as well. So when people are changing, patterns are being broken, give everyone some grace in the partnership for those patterns to work themselves out and to become broken. It's going to take some time to get those patterns broken, and it's going to take time for shifts in communications to become what may be called the new normal. So as we give ourselves grace and we come at the relationship with an open mind and an open heart, we just know it's going to take time to let the new settle in and grow. So that's the takeaway from today. That's the knockout punch. Till next time. All right, that wraps up today's episode of The Real Zack Olinger. Thanks again for listening. If you happen to find this episode insightful or valuable, I invite you to pass it along to somebody else, because chances are, if you found it valuable, they will too. If you're on Instagram, you can find me at The Real Zack Olinger. Until next time, everybody. Thanks for listening.